All right, so my name is Matt Johnson. I am a whistleblower and press coordinator for Direct Action Everywhere. Direct Action Everywhere is a global grassroots animal rights network committed to achieving revolutionary social and political change for animals in one generation. We take nonviolent direct action for animals, and this can take the form of various forms of protest, various forms of community organizing, and most notably, investigating factory farms and rescuing dying animals from situations of distress. And I am joined today by Priya Sawhney, who some of you may have heard from going around and asking questions at these events. And Priya, do you want to tell us some about your involvement with Direct Action Everywhere?
Yeah, I am honored to say that I'm one of the co-founders of Direct Action Everywhere and also a felony defendant currently facing 8 felony charges for exposing animal abuse and rescuing animals from some of the most horrific places on this planet.
Yeah, so that's I think something that ordinary people, they kind of hear about that and they think it's just shocking. I know we've talked to people throughout Politicon, and it's not at all. It's not a partisan thing. It's just kind of even. It's just like people can't even wrap their heads around it. Like, what the heck is going on here? So I mean, I haven't talked to a single person who's heard about this who's been like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, I think you deserve to go to prison. I think that's appropriate for people helping animals. Like, literally, not one person says that. But yet here we are. This is the reality that we're living in. And I mean, I know that. I mean. People look at what's happening on the national stage, what's happening with the Trump administration, and you just see, a government that's not reflecting the will of the people, that's not reflecting ordinary people who say, no, if you're blowing the whistle on misconduct, like, that's the right thing to do, and you should be protected. So we're going to dive into these issues really deeply. We're going to have a Q&A session. We definitely want to hear from everybody's questions. So we're going to dedicate maybe half of our time here for that. We're also going to stick around afterwards. So please, if you have those questions, we're looking forward to those. But let's take a quick step back. Priya, tell folks about yourself personally. How did you get involved with this work?
So yeah, I immigrated to this country with my family when I was 11 years old, and I came from Punjab, India. And as you know, an 11-year-old who is just immigrating to a country, I just wanted to have fun and hang out with my friends. But unfortunately, the time that we immigrated to the United States was also the time that 9/11 happened. And I remember going to school and being called a terrorist by my schoolmates. And that was really a really terrible experience for me. And I just remember looking at footage of animals inside of farms and slaughterhouses. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was that these animals are facing the same discrimination. And I remember when people were calling me a terrorist and looking at me and pointing and laughing, I just wish someone would come and help me. And when I saw these animals, being kicked, being baby piglets being castrated, being having their heads slammed against the wall and being killed, or dairy cows being basically brutalized to an extent I can't even imagine, it just occurred to me that they're facing exactly what I was facing, but even worse, and that I have to do something about it, because I promised myself that if someone's facing discrimination and oppression and they're helpless, I never want them to feel that feeling that I felt, that no one's going to stand up for them at the time that they need it the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, and the irony of it that's horrible, and I've heard you talk about this personally, post 9/11 coming here, you're going to school, and the school kids are taunting you, and you get the terrorist label thrown at you by these kids who just, like, literally based upon the color of your skin. And now here, fast forward, a few generations or a few decades, and now similarly we have literally a domestic terrorism investigation brought against us. So we're labeled by the federal government, by the FBI, labels animal rights activists as domestic terrorists. In the past, they've said that animal rights activists are the leading domestic terrorist threat. And so, it's not white supremacy. It's not the KKK. It's not any of this. It's literally, people walking into farms rescuing animals. And I mean, we had the FBI. In 2017, raided farm animal sanctuaries where we had taken dying piglets, and they expensed hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer resources to go into these farms, or to go to these farm animal sanctuaries, because what? Because they're ostensibly trying to rescue, or trying to return these pigs who we rescued who are about to die, they're running around to these farm animal sanctuaries in Utah and in Colorado, representing Smithfield Foods, representing this giant pork industry. Now, I don't think anybody here is silly enough to think that they care about returning the property value of dying pigs. These pigs were worth nothing. These are going to be, they were going to die. They were going to be garbage. They were going to have a negative value. They were going to be garbage they have to throw away. So this had nothing to do with returning property, and this had everything to do with silencing speech, silencing whistleblowers. And so this is what we're here today to really try to elevate what's going on. And sorry, just to make a further point too with what you were talking about, another thing that's really frustrating sometimes that animal rights activists come across is this being, this is a white person's issue, this is a privileged issue. And you look at, not only these ties where it's when people go through something like that makes them more sympathetic to this, but also, you look at like the harrowing toll, people who work in the slaughterhouse industry, these are jobs of last resort. These are, undocumented people who have no other option are put through these. There's instances of addiction, instances of suicide, instances of mental health issues. It just runs rampant. So, really, everybody loses.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you, if you had more to say on that maybe, or
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add that just to that point, honestly, the reason that I am willing to even face these felony charges and face jail time for these animals is because of my own experiences as someone who was born, born and pointed out to be different. And just to add on to some of the sort of criticisms of how we're targeting, how this is a white movement, when we do these actions and we call them open rescues, mass open rescues, where dozens of people, hundreds at sometimes, go inside of these places to expose violence but also rescue animals, we make it very clear that not only are we nonviolent, but we're here to support the workers who are caught in this terrible system of animal agriculture. And the reality is that nobody should have to earn a living where they have no other option because this is the only job that they can get. Nobody should have to earn a living having to slit the throat of innocent animals. And we've talked to some of these slaughterhouse workers and some of these, farmers. They don't like what they're doing, and they're simply caught in this horrific system. And so people might be asking themselves, well, who are we to blame? And so the real entities that we need to be targeting are these massive corporations like Smithfield, which is the largest pig farm in the world. It's a Chinese conglomerate, so it's owned by Chinese conglomerate, and they have so much power that they can literally send the FBI to do their bidding. And that's unacceptable when taxpayer money is going to fund the FBI, and a conspiracy basically between the government and massive corporations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and we're going to get more into that specifically, like the government involvement and the corruption and really what's going on. People aren't hearing about this. As horrible as this stuff is and how shocking it is, people just aren't hearing about it. And we're trying every which way we can, and that's the reason we're here now is to get the word out on this. But there's a very, very deliberate effort made to silence this sort of thing. But first, let's take a quick step back so people have more context as far as what some of these people who are working in these industries are seeing and what you've seen personally inside of these farms.
Yeah, I've been investigating factory farms, slaughterhouses for the last 6 years, and some of the things that have stuck out to me, honestly, have really, really burned. These images have been burnt in my mind to the point where I can't sleep at night sometimes. And I'll just tell you some of the most shocking things that I saw. But at the farm where I'm currently facing charges, when I walked inside of one of the sheds, one of the barns, one of the things that stuck out to me were baby birds, chickens, who have collapsed under their own body weight. So they're dragging themselves around. They're really small. They obviously don't have their mothers. And when you're inside of a farm with thousands of other birds, and you can't walk, it basically means that you're going to die of thirst or starvation because you don't have access to food and water. And that's why we rescued these animals, because if we don't come to help them, then nobody will. And there's dozens of these stories. So, you see these baby birds dragging themselves on the floor, trying to access food and water, and you often see them getting trampled on. And, that just really breaks your heart, because when you see a baby bird, you almost think of the most innocent image in your mind. They're babies, they're chirping, and they're supposed to be with their mothers, but instead they're dragging themselves on the floor. And one of the other things that I've seen inside of farms is cannibalism. Birds who are or animals who are so hungry that they resort to eating each other, when otherwise they're loving beings who would never do something like that. But they're so hungry and so starved that they have to resort to eating the dead bodies of their the other animals that they live with. And so many other things that I could point out. But animals who have injuries, open wounds, who have infections, who have prolapses, and just recently we went to a farm in California where there was a dumpster pile, a dairy farm where baby cows and even adult cows were being thrown in a dumpster pile simply because they were of no use to these industries. And when we got closer to the dumpster pile, I thought I saw basically a dead baby cow, and I was trying to document that. And what I saw was that she was actually still alive. And when we tried to pick her up and carry her out, hoping that the police would help us, instead of helping us, they asked the farm if they wanted to charge the people who were trying to steal this baby cow. And they had my friends and I who were trying to take this poor cow to the vet. They had us arrested, and they threw this poor cow back into the dumpster pile. And these are just some of the very small snippets of animal agriculture, and there's so much more that we have seen that I can't even. We would be here talking for hours.
And it's just like we have so many instances similar to this, and it's hard to put into words if people haven't actually seen what's happening. But I mean, just literally picturing these women trying to help this dying calf. I mean, it takes two of them to carry, trying to carry this dying calf away. I'm watching this all on Facebook live stream. I'm at home, like, doing commentary on it, and the police show up, and the women, and they're yelling to this guy, she needs help, and he's got his police cruiser right there. It's like, let's throw her in the back of there and take her to somewhere to help her. And they instantly say, put her down. What was their phraseology?
But so the police basically, and this is one of the most notable things when we have sort of come face to face with police when we're doing these sort of actions, is that they're supposed to be here to help citizens and to help the public. And if it was a situation, and to enforce the law, and if it was a situation where dogs are being abused, you can imagine a police officer trying to help out people, trying to help out women who are trying to help a cow or a dog who's in the middle of the street dying. But since it is a farm, and since these farms are really, really sort of, conspiring with the police, you can almost see how they're bowing down to the farm and saying, what do you want us to do next? So you can see how the police and the government are doing the bidding of these corporations. So the police basically told us, you don't dictate this contact. And they demanded that we, put our hands behind our back, hand over the baby cow to them, and they actually ripped her out of our arms and dumped her back to the farm.
Wow. So like we say, many of these instances where we've tried to expose what's going on in farms and where we've tried to rescue these animals have resulted in legal consequences. Can you just top level kind of summarize what some of these legal consequences that Direct Action Everywhere has encountered?
Yeah, so right now, activists or whistleblowers with Direct Action Everywhere are facing multiple felony charges. And just to highlight some of these felony charges we're facing are burglary, theft, conspiracy charges, and these are just some of them. And we have about over 5 cases and over 100 activists who at this point have been arrested for exposing animal cruelty inside of farms
and felony charges.
on felony charges and for rescuing animals and trying to take them to the vet.
And so I think what a lot of people might be thinking is that, well, certainly we care about animals, but why don't we report this to authorities? Why don't we go through the established legal channels? Why do we have to resort to walking onto farms and doing it? What do you say to that?
Yeah, and this is the question. This is the age-old question. Why don't you why don't you just take legal action? Why are you doing illegal things like going on property where you're not, where you haven't been given access to, or you haven't gotten permission? And the sad thing is that before we go on to these farms or slaughterhouses, we actually have tried to contact the district attorneys of Sonoma County, where I'm facing charges. We've tried to get sit-down meetings with public officials, with government officials. We've made phone calls. We've sent hundreds of emails. We've tried to point out that, hey, there's this criminal conduct that's taking place inside of your county, which is literally against California law, and we've gotten no response. And when we have gotten a response, it's basically been just to sort of we don't really want to talk to you. You're criminals, but there's no real conversation. So we're basically forced to take action, and we're forced to take nonviolent direct action, not only for these animals who are being criminally abused inside of these farms, but also for people like you all who are being kept in the dark by these corporations. And some of the work that we do, we describe it as giving the public a window into these farms and slaughterhouses. Because without that camera footage, without these live streams, people literally wouldn't know. And you could go to Whole Foods and say, wow, look at all this humane meat that I'm buying. When in reality, Matt and I have seen firsthand, we've rescued animals from so-called certified humane farms, and we can tell you that the conditions are no different than what you all know to be as factory farms, and that we all, as the public, are being duped by these massive corporations into believing that we're doing something good for the animals.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just really want to stress the point that, we've tried the so-called legitimate channels, the legal channels, and even when we've had, in many cases, we have law scholars supporting us and saying this is criminal animal abuse. I mean, I think a common person's reading of the law and seeing what's happened there says this is criminal animal abuse. We even had in Sonoma County, California, where these investigations have happened, the local animal services agreed with us that this is criminal conduct. So there's no question that what we're talking about is criminal animal abuse. And yet, in the face of it, there's so much power behind these industries that the charges are in fact being levied against us, while the farms get off scot-free. So while your local authorities, animal control or somebody is going to have strong enforcement action on dogs and cats, and as well they should, unfortunately, because there's so much money tied up in some of these places, like Sonoma County, California, animal agriculture has so much power, and so much of their economy is tied up in it, and so many of the political contributions are tied up in it, that the laws are just selectively enforced. And so it's a really shocking state of affairs. And I kind of want to also comment while we're here on the broader picture, beyond just the local, the local politics, because it's one thing for one certain county to kind of be taken over and the legal system to being abused in this way, but there's also a broader question to have about why is this issue not being discussed on a national stage? Why are the presidential candidates? Animal agriculture is very rarely talked about. And recently we've seen some good comments, some shifts in the right direction from folks like Bernie Sanders, from Elizabeth Warren, and I say this as a person personally. I caucus for Bernie Sanders in Iowa, so I am a Bernie Sanders supporter. And it is good that he's talked about factory farming, but the one thing that is very notably absent, even from Bernie Sanders' conversation about factory farming, is there's basically not a word at all about the animals themselves, the most obvious victims of factory farming. So it's great that we're talking about how harmful factory farming is for to the environment, to local waterways, and these impacts that are disproportionately going to poor people and to people of color, but there's also the animals that are living that day in and day out, and it's really unfortunate. I think that it is a bit of a political calculation, and it causes me pain to say that, because I know how much Bernie Sanders is, in my view, this very principled, consistent, representative, and I have literally bet money on him to win the presidency, and I sure hope he does. But in this case, unfortunately, and I think they're actually wrong in that calculation, which we should get into some of those statistics, but I think they've made a political calculation that if we talk too much about animal rights, what animals are enduring in farms, that it's going to hurt us politically, and so they just don't do it.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to point out that there is some discrepancy there, because when we come to places, like Nashville, which, honestly, I just feel so incredibly honored. People everywhere are so open-minded and so loving and caring when it comes to animals. And we've noticed that here. Everyone who learns about some of the charges that I'm facing and some of the things that we've seen always says, I would not support that. And so we know that Americans love animals, and I know, Matt, you can address that in a second. We know that you and we're from completely different backgrounds. You're from Iowa, I'm from Punjab, India, and most people wouldn't expect that we have a very similar lifestyle and very similar values when it comes to animals. Well, and also because we're friends, but, just two people from different parts of the world, and this is not very rare when it comes to animals. We're a nation of animal lovers. We're a world of animal lovers, and yet we have people who are facing felony charges in California, which is also, again, supposed to be a progressive state. And we have Bernie Sanders and other presidential candidates who are saying, no, we can't talk about this. Yet the public itself has a completely different perception of these issues.
And so, yeah, I think that just hits it right on the head. And I think that we need to, we need to kind of signal our representatives, signal these candidates that it is something that they can run on. I mean, you look at the state of California. Last year, 2018, California passed Proposition 12, which is this, at least on paper, which we won't get into that, but on paper, this is groundbreaking animal welfare legislation, and it passed overwhelmingly. 63% of Californians said, no, we need to be treating animals, on paper, substantially better. And so that just goes to show you that there is a lot of support behind these issues, and we just need to elevate them, to get them out there and really just get the public behind these sort of things, because that's the only way that these prosecutions succeed in what they're trying to do. They're trying to get us to shut up and stop telling people what's happening inside of these farms and go home, take a plea deal, and just get your 3 years of probation. And I mean, to give another example, and I could just go on all day, but we had activists who were charged for entering a Smithfield farm who ended up taking a plea deal because they didn't want to go to prison. Their plea deal, the most unconstitutional thing you've ever heard of in your life, included a gag order that they had to delete all social media references to Smithfield and not talk badly about Smithfield for a period of 3 years. And they're in this position where they're like, well, I could fight this war and people would agree with me, but am I going to win in Utah? Like, I don't know if I'm going to win. And so, like, the will of the people doesn't matter. Democracy doesn't matter. The First Amendment doesn't matter. Like, none of this matters. If we aren't elevating these conversations to where the will of the people, can succeed.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that we actually still have two people who are still facing felony charges in the Utah case, where they're up against Smithfield Farms. And I mean, once you actually add up all of the charges they're facing, it adds up to something like 60 years in prison. We know that for rescuing animals, that's quite unlikely, but that is, if you add up all their charges, that is what they're facing, which is absurd when you think about the fact that they took two baby piglets who were basically considered trash. And if we didn't publicize this rescue, Smithfield Farm wouldn't have even known about it, because they have tens of thousands of pigs inside of their farms. I mean, millions. They wouldn't know they wouldn't know that they're missing two dying baby piglets if we didn't put out a video and say, hey, this is what's happening. And the reason that we do that, the reason that we go inside of these places without any masks on and show our faces and call the press and say, we want you to know about this, is because we know we're not doing anything wrong. The real crime is not happening by the people who are blowing the whistle on these corporations. The real crime is happening behind closed doors, inside of Smithfield Farms, inside of Petaluma Poultry. The real crime is happening against these innocent animals who have committed no crimes. And what these companies are trying to do is blame people who are exposing this misconduct, and oftentimes lie about us. So we know that we're up against a huge industry which has a lot of resources, a lot of power, a lot of money, and will do whatever they can to protect it.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I got a little message here, a suggestion that we should talk about our friend Oliver, because just as like a personal note, who you have at home and what his story is.
All right. Well, I am very privileged and honored to be the mom of a dog who was rescued by my friends from the Yulin dog meat trade. They went to China and actually were deported from China for rescuing 3 dogs. They literally took a beating from the dog meat farmers for going inside of a dog meat farm and rescuing 3 dogs who were going to be killed for dog meat. And I live at home with this with our dog. We named him Oliver, and he's just the light of my life. He was really, really traumatized when we first rescued him. And one of the reasons that we actually rescued Oliver and went to China to show people what's happening inside of these dog meat farms is to bring the message home and say it's so easy to point the finger to this country and say, wow, look at those evil monsters in China who are killing 10,000 dogs, which, it's a lot of dogs, but when you compare that to the pigs and cows and chickens and other animals that we're killing here in the United States, it's nothing. I mean, we're killing 10,000 pigs are almost killed inside of Smithfield's largest farm every single day.
And I mean, and to go up a step further with that, when we did this investigation, and we meaning Direct Action Everywhere, did this investigation in Yulin, China, and rescued these dogs, ABC Nightline had the investigators on, and they covered them. But what was, it was great that they covered them, but they cut off, and they covered the portion about how bad the dogs are treated in China, and what they didn't cover, what they cut out of the clip, was when we said, and by the way, what's happening in these factory farms in the U.S. is arguably worse. I mean, I don't know, is a dog living a short life, pardon, I just want to make sure people kind of understand what we're talking about here. A dog living a short life in a concrete cage where he runs around and then is beaten to death. I don't know, is that better than the pigs that Smithfield has, where these mother pigs are in gestation crates their entire lives and can't even turn around? Like, I don't know, they're not, I mean, it's a horrible hair to split.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the issue. But when you do, I mean, I've asked the investigators who went inside of these dog meat pens, and just objectively, when you look at the concrete pens and you look at the conditions, these dogs do lead better lives in China if you compare it to the pigs and cows and chickens that are being raised inside of farms like Smithfield. And our investigators, some of the things that we found were mother pigs in gestation crates that are so tight that they can't even turn around to look at the babies that they just give birth to. And they're giving birth to their babies in, basically their own feces, and they'll never be able to see them. And this is how they lead their entire lives. And for exposing this misconduct, and I think, we've had the privilege of working with Glenn Greenwald, who is who's just an incredible journalist who is not only very supportive of animal rights, but has written just an amazing, incredible, most read piece on animal rights, showing the corporate ties between Smithfield and the FBI, and how they're conspiring against whistleblowers. And one of the things that he said that I'll never forget is, just remember that the reason that you're facing felony charges and the reason that these companies are coming after you is not because you're weak. It's because you're winning.
Yes, love that. I mean, yeah, it's like, in the eyes of the status quo, you rescue a dog and you're a hero, and you rescue a pig and you're a terrorist. So, all right, I want to move things along here. I mean, we could just go all day long, but we want to have time for questions here as well. But let's get to what are some concrete things. I mean, I think, like I said, everyone we've talked to here loves animals and thinks what's happening to us is an outrage. So what can they do to help?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that people can do. And number one, thank you all for being here, because I know some of the things that we're talking about are really uncomfortable truths. And I just wanted to point out that, again, what we're trying to do is, instead of targeting individuals, we're trying to change a larger system. And you all have the power to do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Regardless of who you are. But one easy thing that you can do right now is just take out your phones. Our friends are here. If you need help, they can raise their hands. But just go to righttorescue.com. And if you can, just sign the petition to help not only me, but also my friends who are facing criminal charges. And one of my goals and one of our goals in DXC in the next year is to enshrine the legal right to rescue, which basically means that at least in California, and hopefully what happens in California, since it is such a trendy state, will happen everywhere else, will have the legal right to rescue animals. And I'm going to trial in January along with my co-defendants, and we're going to be arguing that we should have the legal right, which we already have according to the law. So we basically want this legal right to be enshrined and to be, and to be recognized. And you can do that by signing this petition and by signing on to this. But also, if you do sign this petition, you'll get on our mailing list. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be in California anytime soon, maybe think again, because we actually host an annual conference every single year where we're not only just training people in these tools that we have to help them become better voices for animals, but we're actually doing it for whoever wants to learn how to organize protests, whatever your cause might be, how to do press, and how to just basically be an organizer for social justice, and that's the Animal Liberation Conference in Berkeley, California.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. And I want to step back a little bit and talk about what this case would mean. So we literally have this case in California. They've thrown all these felony charges at these folks, trying to scare them away, trying to get us to stop exposing, stop sending them videos of criminal animal abuse happening in their county, trying to get us to go away, trying to get us to plea down. We're not doing it. Priya's standing in, as are these other defendants, and taking this to trial. And if we can get enough pressure and we can get enough support, we can win this trial, then we can set that legal precedent. And we can say, just the way that the law protects us if we break a window and save a dog in a hot car on a hot day, which is fine, which is great, we should also be able to rescue all these animals that are suffering and dying. And we don't care, if you got money, we don't care about your $1 billion profits. There's dying animals. We need to go in there and we need to take those animals out. So definitely, please sign up on that righttorescue.com and yeah, there's various ways you can get involved. You'll be getting our social media information. I mean, literally, when stuff goes big on social media, that puts a lot of pressure. Like if somebody's name is out there, if they're tagged on Twitter and something is trending, I mean, that has an impact. So no matter where you're at, like you can literally do that, and that takes 30 seconds, and it really does have power. People do feel that pressure as well. So there's definitely a place for everybody, and there's definitely a way that we can all make an impact.
well, and if you want to follow us on Twitter, we're DXE or DX everywhere, and Instagram, we're Direct Action Everywhere, all one word, and Facebook is also Direct Action Everywhere, but it's 3 words.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and open it up to questions? Hey, Julie, actually, maybe if anybody has questions, maybe you can just run on up here. Do you have it turned on?
Hello. Yeah, I think
Okay. Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
And if you could just say your name.
Hi, I'm Spencer. I got a quick question.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. You just have to speak really
All right,
closely.
just speak really loud and close.
I got a quick question. I've been getting Vital Farm eggs. They say they pasture raised. Do you know anything about them and if they're actually legit?
Yeah. So I don't know that particular brand. What I can tell you. Oh, I'm sorry. So he was asking about a particular brand of Vital Farms pasture-raised eggs. And I don't know the specific answer to that question, but what I can tell you is that because of the legal apparatus in this country, is that there is essentially no regulation around these terms. I've been inside of Whole Foods free-range farms. We actually are in the midst. We actually are in the midst of a consumer fraud lawsuit against Diesel Turkey, a Whole Food supplier. They were labeling their stuff as free range, and it's factory farm meat, like bottom line. I don't know that for sure in this case, but I know that it's pretty much the wild, wild west with labeling, and I know that there's a tremendous financial pressure on them to mislead consumers, and they make a premium by putting those labels on stuff.
And is there any nationwide brands that you support? So, because I live in like a food desert, I can't just get a communal farm and stuff like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think we have a major problem with our food system in this country with access, where there's so many people who care about animals and want to do the right thing, and they just don't have those alternatives available. So I think that's a really interesting question in terms of ultimately, what the right way to treat animals is and what animal welfare looks like. I think ultimately, I'm a person who is in favor of animal personhood. I think that's a broader question, so that would be my personal answer would be to say we should move away from using animals. I mean, there's so many alternatives in terms of, where at least the advertised conditions are what you're being told they are. I really think you have to see it for yourself, because you cannot trust anything that's put on these labels. Because the people who are being honest on their labels and are selling stuff honestly, they're just going to be priced out of the market. So I think there's just so much deception and so much secrecy in this that it's really hard to know if you don't literally see it yourself. But more broadly, I mean, I think this speaks to the issue of food deserts and the issue of our food system. We're subsidizing. I mean, again, as a Bernie Sanders lover, I mean, as somebody TYT has hosted us, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, all these people are on board with massive subsidies to animal agriculture. I mean, this is an industry not only is torturing animals, not only is a massive contributor to climate change, environmental harm. We need to switch that. We could totally put those subsidies into these other foods, make these foods available to people everywhere, make these plant-based alternatives available everywhere, so people don't have to choose between going broke and caring about animals.
Hey there. So I just wanted to say first off that I really appreciate what you do. I saw you at a panel the other day where you came out and said that you're facing felony charges for being a whistleblower, and I think that's ridiculous, and I think you're just a hero. One thing I wanted to ask is, as a consumer, well, no ethical consumption under capitalism anyway, but as a consumer, I'm absolutely horrified by, like every single brand in America has some sort of messed up testing on animals. And I 100% appreciate what you're doing with the farms, but is there any movement or action you're taking against, the big companies that are testing on animals?
Yeah, that's an incredible question. And so, what's your name?
Angela.
Angela just asked, are we taking some action against companies that are testing on animals? And we actually over a year ago did an investigation where we went inside of where our whistleblowers and investigators went inside of a breeding facility which breeds dogs who are going to be tested on, and we actually rescued some of those dogs who live with some of our community members back in Berkeley, California, and these dogs were going to ingest laundry detergent so that these companies can basically say, yeah, we tested this on animals. Meanwhile, these dogs are forced to ingest laundry detergent, and they're eventually going to throw up blood and die from some of these experiments. So the quick answer is yes, and we try to do this. We've investigated a lot of different industries, including the fur industry, animal testing facilities, and what we found inside of all of these places is that there's so much rampant animal cruelty everywhere, and a lot of it is, most of it is because of large corporations trying to profit off of animal abuse. So thanks for asking that.
Thank you.
Hi guys. I agree with you pretty much wholeheartedly. I think the way that animals are treated in farms is really horrible and it should be fixed. As a mediator myself, I kind of struggle with that because I understand how bad it is, but it's still hard for me to give that up. But also, I missed the beginning of the panel, so I'm not sure if you touched on this, but I'm of the belief that the killing of animals for food isn't inherently bad. It's just the way that corporations have kind of made that so bad in this country in terms of how they farm it is a real issue. So I was wondering, what would your ideal solution be? Would it be would you want to abolish the farming of meat, or is there a happy medium that you would want to kind of go there?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So my answer is yes, I would ultimately want to move from to basically give animals a Bill of Rights and to move to switch the paradigm with how we interact with animals from one of property to one of personhood. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have. And while we may disagree on that, or I've had many conversations and we could probably go a long time on that, I think that we for right here and now, I think that the kind of the happy medium you're referring to, there's a long ways for us to go between here and there, and we can really focus on that. I do think that you look at the economic pressures. You think about your dog or your cat at home. That's kind of the definition of what an ordinary person thinks is the acceptable level of care, and total up the vet bills, total up the care, how much time, how much space, how much energy, and when you talk about a chicken that's going to be killed and sold for $5. The entire supply chain of that chicken, it ends up at $5, $10. There really is. It just doesn't compute. So I think that we're really kind of struggling up against something where this business is just dying to continue existing. This industry just wants to keep existing, but it just can't. And so that's why it has to silence the truth. And the bottom line is 99% of the animals used for food in this country are living in factory farm settings, in settings that any one of us would be horrified if we saw. And so, maybe you can see that scenario where there's one, or 10 cows living in a pasture or something like that, and that's certainly less morally egregious. But ultimately, I think we need to shift the paradigm. And if we, in this day and age, if you've had Beyond Meat, Field Roast, there's so many delicious alternatives. It really, to me, it's an outrage that you're even put in that situation, because our government has the resources to flip the paradigm today. We can stop paying hundreds of billions of dollars to subsidize animal torture, environmental degradation, polluting these poor communities, these communities of color. We can stop that tomorrow. We can subsidize alternatives that taste good, that taste better, that are better for your health, that are just superior in every single way. And so, the enemy really here is the system. And, these philosophical conversations are interesting, but we're on the same team.
Yeah, and I just thank you for asking that. I just wanted to just let everyone know that one of the things that we get asked as animal rights activists and just people who are advocating for animals is, you're infringing on our personal choices. That it's our personal choice to eat animals. And the reality is that none of us over here were given a personal choice when we were kids, whether we want to be a part of a system which criminally abuses animals. And so if we are standing up for personal choices, this is a great time to do it because none of us were given a personal choice to hurt or help animals. And I guarantee you, I'm willing to bet on it, if we ask most people, hey, if you had a choice to help a pig who we found, let's just say in the middle of the room, someone's beating up that little piglet, would you help her or would you hurt her? More than, a large percentage of people, I would argue, would say, let's go help that pig and get her the vet care that she needs and take her to a sanctuary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm definitely into political dissent and social dissent, and I think it's important to criticize the system that we are a part of and that we maintain. But I'm curious, when I think of what you mentioned about right to rescue and everything and facing felony charges for standing up politically, it's the same thing that MLK had to go through when he was standing up, against the status quo. People who admire this type of work and who want to become more part of it, should we be afraid of getting arrested, or is that just part of the fight?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and you're absolutely you're asking a really good question. And I think as someone who is facing up to up to a decade in prison,
And we have other activists facing potentially 70 years in prison. Actually,
yeah, and I think that to me it's a few different questions, I guess, because I really try to go by this definition of courage, which is you take action even when you have fear. And so do I have fear of going to prison for 10 years? Yes. Am I going to do it regardless? Yes. I don't want to go to jail, but if I have to for these animals who are essentially in prison for their entire lives for committing no crimes, then so be it. So thanks for asking that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both.
And if I would add real quick, and if there's all sorts of ways. Like I said, literally, you share a Facebook post, you're on our team, helping us all the way up to all levels of involvement. So we have these conferences where you can get trained up and be part of this activism, but at all levels, you're a valued and appreciated part of it. So no pressure. People are have immigration statuses or career situations or family situations, that all makes sense. So don't feel pressure, but the options are there.
Hello, my name is Jess Preet. I admire your tenacity, and here's hoping you do keep things nonviolent. And I'm also from the Punjab, like Priya, and just a thought from that kind of line of philosophy, which I've got on the back of my business card, is if you wouldn't eat Fido the dog, why would you eat Bessie the cow?
Preach.
And my question is, have you heard of Project Drawdown, which is something that some of my friends in Seattle are into? And what are your thoughts about that?
I have not heard of it.
Okay.
But if you want to summarize.
Yeah, there's a book, too, associated with that, and a website, and it's basically reduce, reuse, recycle. But there are 100 different points in that book.
Oh, so reducing animal consumption?
Not just animal, but just all kinds of consumption. But
Okay.
I thought that it might sort of, have some link with what you're doing.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, I'd like to look into it.
Sure.
But yeah, I think anything that's gonna
Right.
increase ethical consumerism, that sort of thing, like for sure. And yeah, I'll definitely check it out, and we can talk afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks, guys. Kind of a philosophical question. So I believe that all humans have a certain level of inherent value, and I believe that animals have inherent value as well. But my question to you guys is that, do you believe that, number one, about humans and animals? And what does that value comparison look like? Are they the same? Are humans inherently more valuable?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So yeah, I've had many conversations similar to this in my life, and I think that I think that they certainly all do have value, and it's a challenge. To me, that's sort of like putting the question on the table of do humans with different traits have value? If you're going to say, well, animals have lesser value, well, what about a human who's maybe, these can go to a dark place, but just philosophically, like a human who has a disability, or a human who's has a mental disability or isn't going to be around as long, that sort of a thing. So I don't know. It's like an impossible question to ask. I think there are certain ways that you could maybe make that distinction, and people could fall on all sides of it, and people could all fall on all sides of it and still support this work for sure. But I think before we even get there, we can say I think it's very reasonable to say that all individuals who have rights have the right, or excuse me, all individuals who have feelings have the right to have those feelings matter. And so that's where we're ultimately at, and it comes down to this question of personhood. And we're all kind of saying that all humans, I think we're all bought into the idea that all humans are legal persons. I don't get in your bubble, you don't get in my bubble. You can roam freely, I can roam freely. And so, if we're not going to say that, we come down to this conversation often of like, name the trait. So what is the trait that someone who says we should exploit animals or possess or treat animals as property, what would be that same trait that animals possess that if it was in a human you would justify it? And that really kind of leads nowhere. I just wanted
to add that we as humans have made this distinction through our language and just because we consider ourselves superior, but humans are animals. That is a scientific fact. Humans are animals. And so as far as that's concerned, we have drawn this arbitrary lines between human animals and non-human animals, and there's a word for that, and it's called human supremacy. We've heard of other types of supremacy, but that is ultimately what we're sort of targeting, which is the system of human supremacy, where we think that we are better than other animals simply because we're a different species, when in reality, or because we think we're a different species who can talk or etc. But in reality, we could do the same. Birds could do the same to us. They can fly, and we can't fly. I guess you can say that since we have airplanes, we can fly, but there's so many non-human animals who are able to do so many different things that we can't do, and who is to decide what those things are that make us more superior? So the ultimate sort of statement to be made is that we're all animals, and we're all, and for that reason, we all deserve the right to be free from harm.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate the question. We love, thank you so much for bringing that up. So we might have time for one or two more questions, but I want to real quick give people again information on how they can get involved before we run out of time. So if you want to quick say that.
You can, just go on to righttorescue.com and sign the petition. And if you do have a few dollars to spare every month, some of us are facing, felony charges, and we just appreciate that this work continue on. No pressure, because we'd rather just have your involvement, but feel free to sign up to become a monthly donor for even $3 a month could help us. It is on righttorescue.com.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, this is kind of going to get lost into, because that was so long, but I was going to also tie into that. If corporations are people, then critters should be sort of considered too. But what I was thinking was, if every individual that can't let go of their steak or their pork chop could actually go to one of those facilities and take a tour and see where that wonderful meal came from, they might change their mind and never be able to consume it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, transparency and whistleblowing is a big piece of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, last question.
Hi. So one common talking point I hear when hearing this issue discussed is, actually I'm forgetting my question right now. I wrote it down just so I remember it. Okay. So one common talking point I hear is that animal cruelty and abuse and torture mostly happens in other countries, where in the U.S. has more regulation, and that we treat animals more humanely, so to speak. And while we're on that discussion, I just want to challenge how kind of ridiculous humanely that word is, because humans are capable of some of the most heinous and cruel crimes, stuff that no other animal is even capable of. But anyway, that's a side point. But so I just wanted to ask you a question of I'm not really well read on how bad animal abuse is in the United States. I know a lot of stuff that happens internationally. I just want you to kind of like, maybe challenge that narrative on,
Yeah.
What goes on inside the United States.
Sure. So we got like 30 seconds here, but I'll give a quick response. Yeah, I mean, so at the federal level, there are no federal regulations whatsoever regarding the welfare of over 95% of the animals used for food, and even the regulations that do exist. So I give the example of California. They just passed another animal welfare law, Prop 12, last year, but in 2008, California passed Proposition 2, which was another supposedly landmark animal welfare law where overwhelmingly supported. Over 60% of Californians wanted this. This law goes into effect. We have actually reported dozens of instances of abuse under Proposition 2, as have other groups. Dozens of reports from independent people. Multiple groups have been submitted to the authorities, and to date there have been 0 successful prosecutions under Proposition 2 in California. So our legal system is unfortunately just completely broken, and when we have a system which is broken, which is really reinforcing rather than regulating industry abuses, it's left to ordinary people to take action ourselves to enforce to hold our government officials accountable to the will of the people.